It's July 3rd, 2024, and it's TG3. The topic today is I have some questions to just catch up on module harmony, and apart from that, we do not have anything else on the agenda. Uh, yeah, unless Daniel or folks have anything to bring up, but let's just start with that. Um, I learned by hearsay that uh, for one, congratulations to all of the progress on module harmony at plenary. One of the details that was brought up was that the deferred module export produces a unique namespace object for each importer.
Uh, no, no. Each module has two namespace objects, one that's deferred and one that's not deferred, but all importers get for a given flavor the same copy.
Okay. And um, mechanically, why was it necessary to make them separate objects?
Because with deferred imports, it's much more easy to have access to the namespace object of a module that true while evaluating. So if a module in error state, either because the module already true and you do import defer of it, or because you do import defer, then you trigger evaluation with property access somewhere in some try catch, and then the module moves to an error state, and then you read the property again from the namespace. And it
all
would be
property access from the namespace results in an exception. It's a viral
right
contagion.
now we want right. It'd be good if it's not just the first property access that throws, but all of the property accesses. But we cannot change this for the old model namespaces, so we had to get a different object.
Okay, well, at least that's a clear rationale, and it is not as it's not concerning. I think that's good. Okay, I'll socialize that with Peter because I know Peter at Moddable was uh, surprised and wanted to hear a rationale, and I'll run it by him and see if he agrees that it sounds fine.
Yeah, I was really trying to get to just keep a single object. Like the original stage one proposal was recommended two objects, but then once we found this like kind of race condition, we prefer to just have two separate objects and make
Yeah.
it like more deterministic.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Uh, the only other thing on the module harmony docket that I had interest in discussing was bindings, the bindings property for module source reflection. But I think that I want to have that conversation with Guy.
Yeah.
That's all I've got.
Yeah, and actually, we'd like to introduce, even if you guys aren't here, just introduce it to me and folks here. I think Guy has already some understanding of what you want. It'd be great if you can like explain for the others.
I'm sorry, I missed something.
Okay, sorry. I was saying, even if you guys aren't here, would you mind introducing what are the changes that you would
Yes.
like to see?
Yes. Just for the record, to brief everyone here, there is a Guy is proposing in the next proposal for module harmony, the introduction of a JavaScript module source constructor that accepts the text of a module and produces a handle for a module source that can be later imported. Is that right?
I don't know if the proposal actually introduces the constructor, or like I don't know if the constructor is constructible or not.
It might. Okay. Let's assume that we're discussing the proposal that does introduce a constructor, because only at that point does it make sense to do Java's. Oh, wait, no.
Wait.
I got it. He's proposing, right. For the existing module, JavaScript modules, he's proposing the ability to reflect the module source object with import source, which doesn't have a constructor necessarily, but would be in a position to reflect the bindings of the parsed module object. And I see Jazz's hand. Clarifying question?
Uh, does the module close over things?
Lexically, the module source does not close over any state. It closes only over the source text, the source text, and can also close over the origin of the text for the purposes of CSP, and also for some hosts may be a key into a weak map from a particular imported source to its corresponding module instance. The module instance, once initialized, would have state.
Can okay. I need to read up on this. I'll go read up on this.
Okay. Yeah, so the module source object is Guy is proposing reflection of the imports and exports of the JavaScript module as properties of module source objects in general. So WebAssembly modules would have a reflection of their imports and exports, as well as JavaScript, and they would be the same, or they would be compatible. They would be sufficient for the purposes of analyzing the transitive dependency graph of a whole bunch of module sources that you've accumulated. The which of course, which in all cases is exactly and only the metadata of a module that can be observed by parsing the text of the module only. The current proposal is that there would be 3 functions on module source instances or on their prototype. The imports, which returns an array of module specifiers that are imported by the module. The import specifiers, that is to say that they are not resolved. And then a re-exports function, which returns an array of import specifiers for modules whose namespaces are re-exported on the module's namespace. And then exports, which is an array of the names that are exported on the namespace object of the corresponding module. Nicolo.
Just to clarify, the namespace that is re-exported is for export star from and not for export star as something from.
Right. Yeah, export star as would create an export named binding, whereas export star from doesn't have knowable corresponding names at the time you parse the script. Thank you, export star. So the yeah. And of course, the re-export star from, the order is going to matter because they presumably have precedence. No?
They have precedence for the importing side, but not for the exporting side, because you cannot have conflict. You cannot have conflicts.
So conflicts are a link error later. Okay, so it's better than Python. Still maintenance hazard, but better than Python. Okay, so what Peter and Patrick from Moddable had proposed that I had captured in the compartment proposal for module source reflection was, instead of having an import exports and re-exports, which for the record, SES approximately implements import exports and re-exports. But XS implemented bindings, and they had a good reason to do it that I had forgotten. The bindings array is an array that reflects every name that is imported or exported for the module in order, and the module specifier from which it comes. So it's an array of objects where there's a distinguished key that tells you which type of binding it is. So, for example, import something is an import from binding, and import X is an import X from binding. So there's an import property and a from property on the binding, etc. ad nauseum. Um, the um, the virtue that this has over the current design is that it makes clear which properties are going to exist on the internal namespace versus the external namespace. So if you do import X as Y, that means, that communicates that the module environment record is going to have a Y name on its internal namespace object. And that's totally that's not expressed at all in the imports, exports, and re-exports. And also, if you say export X as Y from this module, that means that there's going to be an X property on the internal namespace. No, that means that there will not be a property at all on the internal namespace, but a Y property on the external namespace. And it's in its aggregate, if you have the entire array of bindings, there can be ambiguities for what names get bound to the internal namespace versus, or it resolves all ambiguities about what names appear on the internal module namespace. Now, there is not yet a reification of the internal module namespace. However, for virtual module sources, there will necessarily be such a thing. That is to say that the execute hook or the evaluate hook, however we name it, for a virtual module source needs to have a reflection of the internal namespace so that it can set properties on that to be reflected on the external namespace. The names are not necessarily the same. And so in order to be fully coherent from bottom to top with virtual module sources in general would ideally be able to express this distinction. One possible resolution to this going forward is to just have a totally different way of expressing bindings for the purposes of virtual module sources from other module sources in general. But yeah, that's the whole thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have any answer or opinion right now, other than maybe first reactions. But first reactions, that it feels like it's way too much data. It feels like this old framework, like Angular 1 that relied on the name of function parameters. That should just be internal. But yeah, this is just like a first reaction, not anything deep.
Yeah, my first reaction was similar to bindings, that bindings in the way that XS is using them, I suspect betray implementation details of XS that might not be shared by other VMs. Like how the bindings arrays that they created, it reflects one-to-one the nodes of their syntax tree, and which is distinct from Babel's. Babel's does not, like Babel's syntax tree definitely doesn't express, doesn't atomize import and export expression at syntax nodes. Yeah. So I would presume that not all that existing virtual machines probably have different internal representations of imports and exports for purposes of bindings. But for certain, there is a module environment record with distinct names for the purposes of linking. So yeah, it's possible that this topic settles really straightforwardly, that we defer the issue of the bindings array until it becomes essentially an argument that is specific to the virtual module source, and the resulting module source object reflects imports, exports, and re-exports based off of the bindings. It is trivial. I just implemented like a week or two ago the translation from the bindings array to imports, exports, and re-exports. It is lossy, but that is possibly okay. That's all I've got.
If there is nothing else, I have a small update on an issue I opened in the 260 repository a while ago about indirect eval accidentally capturing the current module scope for resolving relative specifiers. And I think Legendacast and I will present in the next plenary, suggesting to not do that. And there is implementation divergence, so it's something that can probably be changed so that only direct eval captures any scope and nothing else.
I recently sifted that issue to the top of my tabs, and I'm glad you're picking it up. All right. I for those who have foolishly allowed their video to be shared, I see pensive faces on Jazz and Michael. No?
Just send here in chat the issue if anybody wants to see what was it talking about.
I don't. No, I don't. I'm not in a position to articulate my concern. I have concerns about direct versus indirect eval, but I am not in a position to articulate what that concern is.
Oh, well, take a look at the issues that Nicolo shared in chat. It is concerning. The Nicolo found, I believe you found this in while around the time where I proposed evaluators, and you know, evaluators are sort of the key pin that basically, if we got evaluators into the language, not only would it unlock more pro-social behavior for like testing tools like Jest, by giving them a way to create module namespaces that had different utilities in global scope, but captured just for that module, it would it's the last thing that we would need in order to implement a reasonable compartment, a very small compartment implementation, without having to litigate all of the details of the compartment API, which I think would be a huge step forward. But evaluators rely on this property that we believed to exist in the language already, that every function constructor, all of the function constructors, and eventually module constructors would have a reference to an environment record that could be reliably used to determine what global scope to use for evaluation. And I'm not actually paged in on the exact details about the from issue 3160, but there's a dynamic scoping concern that just it lives in the cracks. That's right. It's something like the process of looking up the environment record for the purposes of evaluation is reaching up the stack instead of properties.
Yeah, but like it's that if you use dynamic import inside new function, its behavior depends on where you call new function, rather than just depending on which new function constructor you're using.
Right. Right. Was that clear as water, Jazz?
Sorry, ask that question again.
If so Nicolo's explanation is that the issue is that there is implementations differ on this point, but the desired behavior, when you say dynamic import inside of the text of a function that was constructed with the function constructor, which global scope that dynamic import should be
Oh,
executed in should depend on which function constructor you used,
yeah.
not the scope in which the function was constructed.
Yeah, that makes. Man, I feel like this is something that we need to think through much more carefully than we have. I feel like we're doing an incremental thing. Yeah, that sounds fine.
Yeah. So the evaluator's proposal depends on the ability to say new set of evaluators, and then the evaluators is a function constructor, an eval function, an async function constructor, and a module constructor, each of which should be associated with the evaluators so that all of them are all of their import and all of the dynamic import behaviors of those evaluators are tied to the evaluators hooks. So we have to fix 3160 before we have a coherent story for evaluators.
I mean, incrementally, this sounds right. It just, yeah. Yes, sounds great.
Thanks. All right.
I'm actually still wondering, what are we doing? What is the plan for evaluators and the prototype constructor property for evaluators? I mean, I know we in SES we censor the original function prototype and so on, but well, more precisely, the constructor on the original prototype.
Yeah, in the evaluator's proposal, there would be no proposed amendments to the global scope. When you propose in order to implement compartments, you would have to use evaluators and then modify the evaluators you got in order to construct a compartment environment. This is in order to make the largest tent possible. The DSL case doesn't require mutation, doesn't require any repairs to the evaluators in order to be sensible. So you would have a separate bank of constructors and shared prototypes.
Why does compartments require repairs? Like, even if there is the evaluator that function the prototype constructor property points to the correct function, so it doesn't leak the global.
Yeah, you're right. The function prototype would be the same prototype as all other functions, and it's what SES does is it replaces the constructor property of the shared
Right.
function prototype.
Yeah, so basically evaluator is not a way, again, it would not be a way to sandbox your code because there is obvious ways to escape and you need to rely on an extra mechanism to actually sandbox things.
Yeah. So once you have evaluators, it's relatively straightforward to implement lockdown and then compartment in terms of module harmony and evaluators. Yeah. Yeah, the plan. Yeah, I don't think we have a plan for the record, but at some point, Richard and I ought to put our heads together and write some spec text for evaluators. The good news is that most of the spec text for module constructor that it depends upon is a much bigger proposal, and evaluators are kind of tiny, assuming that 3160 gets fixed. All right. It's a lot of dead time. I propose this is a good point to adjourn.
Sounds good.
Goodbye.